Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. This is an audio test for my friend Nate. Nate, can you hear me?
Our meeting to order according to the clock in front of me at 7:01 p.m. Welcome everyone to the school committee meeting of Tuesday, June 7th. Just a reminder to our public and those watching, if you have any questions, those can be emailed to scinfo@pembrokek12.org, and that way we can get that answered for you. With that, again, we want to acknowledge our guests that we have with us tonight. If you would like to speak, a reminder, there is a sheet in the front row or working its way around as it looks like now. If you want to sign that way I can acknowledge you properly. Thank you. I don't believe there's any adjustments to the agenda tonight. Communications, we have none. The approval of the bill schedule has happened. And with that, do I have a motion to accept the school committee minutes of May 7th, 2022?
May 17th.
We have a motion by Susie.
Second by
Second
Sue.
by Sue, seeing as there's only 3 of us this evening. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Minutes are accepted. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the superintendent's report.
So in your packet for this evening, you have a copy of policy IKFB-R. Just a reminder that the R is a procedure associated with a policy. That's the way that those are named. Sorry, I'm not talking to the microphone. This was a new policy that we had moved forward from both Ed Sub and Policy Sub earlier in the month of May in regards to the graduation ceremony dress regulations. So there's a couple of pieces to the policy. We talked about it a little bit at the meeting before your last meeting, but just to reiterate, the policy would put in place a single color gown for students, starting with the class of 2023, and we would just rip that Band-Aid off and start with the class of 2022 due to an ordering issue. The next piece to that is associated, the cap and gown, obviously, that students are still able to decorate the top of their cap however they see fit. But cords and sashes is the other piece of it. So there's 2 cords that are bestowed by the school committee. Those are the National Honor Society cord as well as the top 10% of the class cord. There are a handful of other cords that we've discussed here that are given from various honor societies and groups at the high school. I've given you a table of what those additional cords are and what the requirements are. And then the other piece is sashes. So it seems as though we've kind of oscillated between sashes only for the student council officers and sashes for the officers of student council, the executive board, and the National Honor Society. I think we've had those 2.
President.
The National Honor Society president. So the policy as it's written that was moved forward as and accepted as a first read was to limit the cords to those that were given by the school committee and also to limit the sashes to those that are the student council officers and the military sashes, which has been common practice for us. Obviously, this is just an anchoring document for you to have a conversation from. We had some good conversation the last time we talked about this. You all made some good decisions for our class of 2022, understanding that this topic would come up after graduation for future classes. So again, just a place to start from as far as wording, but happy to discuss and answer any questions you might have about the policies that we have. But in your packet, I gave you the current cords at the high school and what those requirements are, and then there's just an additional attachment for the thespian troupe because their requirements are a little bit different as far as how you gain points to be inducted into that. So.
Thank you, Aaron. Questions for Aaron first.
So for the thespian troupe, is there there's no academic requirement at all? So does most of this just happen after school? Like none of it, there's nothing in there that has to do with school in any way?
Other than participation in the play can get you some points, as you can see from the checklist, that you just have to get 10 points, which is the equivalent of 100 hours in order to be inducted and to stay current. So there's no academic requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a list. I'm
Love
sorry.
list, Susie.
I'm a list
Organization
person,
at its best.
But I've talked to a lot of people, so I'm kind of going to just
Sure.
throw these things out. We were looking at the point system, and there were questions about other organizations outside of the school, but also do the point system, I guess tied to we're recognizing military, the Eagle Scouts came up, Gold Award in Girl Scouts, the Key Award came up in 4-H. That was one of the 4-H leaders approached me about that. Also based on point systems, but not necessarily academic. So I was wondering, in subcommittee, had those been talked about? Also had parents approach me because, you know, we know there's a 3.7 GPA. There was discussion yesterday in one of our meetings a little bit about it. Some of the parents had reached out to me. Recognizing that, you know, again, I'm looking here when we're talking about the GPA for National Honor Society. Obviously, that's the Honor Society's deciding that. It's different. The B, I would assume, is a 3.0 for computer science. Is that right?
In computer science courses.
Courses only. We've got the A- tied to Tri-M. But then we've got, you know, students that their GPAs are significant. You know, it's interesting that we've got students that may have GPAs that are higher in this. Of course, they're making choices at times not to participate in certain things, so that's on their decision. That's their decision. But parents are asking, you know, have we considered other types of awards besides, say, like the top 10% or the top 15, or do we have different color cords?
Right, so I
tied to
think it's
different
important just to
percentage?
remind everybody what the catalyst for this conversation was. And the catalyst was around, you know, we had received a couple of new requests for cords that we hadn't had in the past. And it was, you know, what is the vision of graduation day from the school committee? Is it an inclusive event where we're celebrating the inclusive accomplishment of graduation? And if that is the case, what does it look like for the individual accomplishments? How do we recognize them and how do we celebrate them? You know, I think with a lot of the awards, there's courting ceremonies for a lot of these groups. There's senior awards nights. There's the distinction in the program for several awards for the Honor Society and a couple of other awards like the athletic, I think the 7 and 13 letter athletes were in the program as well. And so the conversation was, you know, what is the vision for that day? And if it's to allow cords, which, you know, I don't think myself and Mark was at the meeting as well, and Mary Beth and Jess, I don't think we're not in favor of allowing cords. It's just what is the threshold to bestow a cord, and then how are we managing that? Because if we're going to say that there's no academic requirement for items such as the thespian, then athletes should get cords, and those in the band should get a cord. And I just envision a lot of options and a lot of different cords, which can be
Some
slightly
of what was
distracting.
thrown out, and then there were, you know, it's a situation where some parents were like, but we don't, you know, we can't get in a situation where everybody gets a trophy because that's not really setting up for reality in real life either. So,
Right, but to your first question,
Yeah.
we have never allowed cords from outside granting agencies,
Okay.
whether it's Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, 4-H. I don't know of any high schools on the South Shore that do allow outside agencies
And
to
I
grant
know
the
you
cord,
and I
because we
talked
wouldn't know
about
what the qualifications necessarily were.
right. And this is what I advised, but I got to ask again.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
absolutely.
going to ask it again, just in fairness.
So we had landed back in 2019 on the two school committee boards, the National Honor Society as outlined in the PHS student handbook, and the top 10% of the class recognizing overall academic achievement as the focus of the school committee, but wanting to make sure that there was an opportunity for other students to be celebrated, because not everybody's going to get a 3.7, and even for all of the students that we do invite into the National Honor Society, not all of them go for it, right? There's there's several components to that. And, you know, I think there are opportunities for our students to be recognized as leaders and to be celebrated for their accomplishments and achievements. But I think in the subcommittee meeting, what we had talked about was that day is celebrating, if it was this past Saturday, all 194 students sitting on that field. You know, and I think the more you add to one person's graduation outfit, the more it takes away from another student and they potentially feel left out. That day, they have all achieved the same thing, and that's meeting our requirements for high school graduation.
It's funny you bring it up, because I think I was able to see that sort of firsthand, right? Being up on stage and kind of seeing the students as they come up, and that was a thought that sort of came to mind as we think about that. And when you talk about the vision of what we want for graduation, what that data represented is the overall achievement of 4 years of academic work to get you to this point. And we do highlight or provide opportunity for each one of the groups in school, each area, whether it's athletics or academics or the arts, to celebrate those accomplishments. And it is sort of that perspective of how is it impacting that day, and what is that day's focus should be, right? And I think that's sort of where it came for me as we were talking about this in subcommittee, that what does this day represent? And I think as we answer that question, that'll sort of help guide us to where we go with the courts.
Right. Everybody on that field and walking across that stage has achieved the same thing on that day.
Right.
So one other question I have is like, do any of the, any, National Honor Society, whoever, is there like a disciplinary issue? Like, do we
Right.
have like a way to vet out somebody who has some sort of a disciplinary record?
For the cords that
For
are
the cords
bestowed
that-
by the
yes.
school committee?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. For the cords that are bestowed by TRIM, Thespian, and the Computer Science National Honor Society, that falls to their advisor, as with the top 10 and with National Honor Society, Mark is the one that would be, able to track that. That was the concern that, if we're moving in the direction of allowing cords, again, one way or the other, I think, as long as we're making the decision that's in the best interest of all kids, I would like to see, if we're going to be allowing them moving forward, that every single one of the cords is bestowed by Pembroke High School, meaning that we have control over the discipline piece. Because there have been some examples in the past where students that are wearing a cord aren't necessarily the profile of a student that we should be celebrating that day because of choices that they've made.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, if we decide to go and have the cords, that we should have some sort of a, rubric or whatever
Sort
that
of
we
standard
use.
rubric, yeah.
Some sort of a standard, because we do want to strive for academic excellence. Like, that's, that's the piece that should be rewarded. So I feel like it should be like in each individual area. I mean, I don't care, like, if there's hundreds of cords, there's hundreds of cords, but I think there should be a standard.
I think
Right,
that
but I
would
think
help.
it's important to remember, if there's hundreds of cords, there's still gonna be a number of kids that have no cords.
Right.
And what does that day feel like for them? Which we talked a lot about in the subcommittee, because we even talked about, what if we just put a flat GPA on everything? But then
Yeah.
we realized it's gonna be the same group of kids that gets all the cords, because if we're saying 3.7, like National Honor Society, that's a small portion of our graduating class.
Yeah.
But is it, because, well, I guess, because, there are students that have above that GPA but weren't considered part of the top 10%. And I guess
Right, so
that
the
means
top
our top
10%
10% really excelled. I mean,
Right, so the top 10% went down. I think the lowest in the top 10 was a 4.28, I think it might have been. For that was the top 20 kids in the class of 2022.
it was a what?
A 4.28, I think, is the lowest GPA of those kids. Mary Beth knows the number better than I.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was right around that range.
So the idea is, and I think this is what had me tripped up in subcommittee, was, leaving, anybody feeling left out, which is difficult. But at the same time, like, I don't feel like we should be giving, I mean, it's still it's still a big accomplishment to get a diploma. It's still a big accomplishment. So I kind of feel like, I've sort of gone back and forth on it, but I kind of feel now that it's unfair to take, for example, National Honor Society. I would never want to. That's an amazing goal. I would never want to see someone not be able to celebrate that accomplishment because they have to put in so many, community service hours, and I mean, it's a big project, and there's a lot of academic. that goes along
Which
with
gets
it.
celebrated at their National Honor Society Awards night, correct?
It does.
Right, but I think as a committee, you would still be allowing the 2 academic awards that you give, because graduation is the celebration of academic achievement. I think there does still need to be some distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
These kids are the kids that have gone so far beyond the academic requirement to get a diploma. But I think it gets to be a slippery slope when we're starting to recognize music, art, athletics in that same realm, right? So
Right.
that day is about the academic achievement of getting a high school diploma.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any, and Mark is good at knowing what's happening around us, I haven't seen anyone not have students wear the National Honor Society. I think in some districts it's a medal, though, isn't It's a metal.
Similar to
Heavy.
valedictorian and so.
Heavy
Correct.
metal.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
do other districts have, like, an extensive amount of cords? I guess that's something that I'm not aware of, because, we've only been in the Pembroke district and then in New Jersey, and it was a long time ago. So I don't know what Marshfield does, or Duxbury, or can you speak to that, Mark?
Sure. As we spoke about both at the Ed Sub and then back in the school committee meeting, there are 35 members of the South Shore Principals Group that I'm a member of, 35 schools. And so when you're talking about the cap and gown colors, the one color cap and gown versus two, there are only 6 schools out of those 35 that still have 2 colors, right? We were one of them at the time.
Just
West-
for that moment in time.
Right. So we were in the distinct minority there, and I felt very comfortable stating that as just a small data piece, one data piece, but it was a data piece. In terms of the codes and what schools allow and they don't allow, it is all over the map. It is difficult to sort that out. There are schools like, who go with just the 2, right, the top 10% and the National Honor Society codes across the curriculum, and not anything indicating a specific area of excellence. But there are others that allow, it's open to all of it, right? DECA and to Key Club and 7-letter and 10-letter and 12-letter athlete awards. They have all, so it's difficult to separate that data point, right? Because it's just all over the place. There's not one constant. There's no one theme.
Did any of the principals speak to the why behind the what?
Some did, but most did not. It was just a decision that's either they inherited it when they became principal, or it's been that way forever here, or,
Exactly.
or some have been very clear that they felt as though the lessening of the value of the cord was a real thing when students had 12 and 13 cords around their necks, and that was the driving force for them to go to the 2 that represent excellence across the curriculum. But again, it's not enough to find a common denominator. It wasn't out of those 30, it's literally everywhere,
That's what I wondered.
So,
I didn't
yeah.
know, but that helps.
Just to clarify, the GPA is 4.43 for the number 20.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I won't tell anyone short.
And a little bit, I know we're all fairly new in the last history of it. I learned 17 years of being Pembroke, correct?
Pembroke High School. having
Pembroke
the
High
highest,
School,
like,
yes.
with
So
always
since
elementary
our
school.
inception, since we've been Pembroke High School, it started with the 2 cords, is that the history?
So, no.
No.
When we started as a high school, the only cord was the National Honor Society cord. In 2019, in 2017, without prior approval, the Tri-M cord was added to the mix. In 2019, when the Thespian Troupe came to the school committee, at that time, the sitting school committee asked for the board to designate the academic achievement as the top 10%. So, for the first
It was just.
12 years, it was just National
Honors.
Honor Society.
Any thoughts from this group, and then we will welcome our public in to speak.
That helps, and thanks for answering the question. I know I've asked some of them before, but
But I
folks
think,
asked me,
I
I'm
just
gonna
want to
ask
point out
them.
that I think everybody that sat on the subcommittees, everybody that's sitting here and thinking about this, just wants to make the decision that's in the best interest of all kids. I don't think
Yeah.
any one of us feels
Absolutely.
one way or the other starkly
No.
for or against cords. We
Right.
just want to make sure that that day is special for all of our students.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
That's
if it's with
important.
cords, great, and if it's without cords, also great.
Right, exactly. I think my only thing is if we decide to do the cords, that we do have to set up a standard for what, because, I mean, personally, I'm not against, I'm fine with cords. It's just that I think there has to be an academic standard for anybody that's receiving that kind of an award at graduation, so.
And Aaron, just as a reminder, any groups that were interested in having courts we've received their requests, and as we had with computer science.
Correct. So
Right.
the year before this, what else was floating out there was Seal of Biliteracy, which again, they had I think it was a pin that they got this summer. But they did not come forward with a cord request, but depending on your decision this evening, there will be several additional requests moving forward. Like the athletic director has already reached out on how we can recognize athletes. I know that our business teacher, Mary Ellen Gates, has reached out about DECA and what that would look like for those students. And then every single curriculum area has a National Honor Society, social studies, math. So there's the potential for there to be an influx next year, which if that's what we decide, that's great, right? But there's everything we've received that has been brought to you, but if, depending on tonight's conversation and decision, there could be the potential for, 10 to 15 additional awards for next year.
And I know Mike's not here, but he did share with me his thoughts where he'd like to see academic standards in whatever chord we decide upon. Sort
I
of
forget who
similar
said-
to
yeah.
echoing some of the conversation that we've had, right?
Yep.
If that's the route that the group decides to go, to have some sort of base standard of academics, because again, that seems to be the history and the core of where the chords came from, was an academic excellence standard. So whatever group that, I would lean that way as well, is making sure there's some sort of standard there. That, and then I also like the concept of having the say in that, so that, again, graduation day is about the end of their journey, so to speak, right? And also having the ability to vet that out, I think, is important.
And I forget who on the committee, or it may have been some of the admin, but had mentioned, we have student athletes. They are student performers. They are student competitors. So
Always the
student
student
always
first.
is the lead. And so and we are an educational facility, so I agree, we've got to have that component in there, or I think we're starting to drift.
Yeah.
Sure. I will ask Matt Wilshire if you would come up, sir. Welcome. For our viewing public, if you just make sure you speak into the mic, introduce yourself, and welcome.
Okay. Hi, my name is Matt Wilshire, and I'm here on behalf of the Computer Science Honor Society to ask the members of the school committee and the school administration to please continue to allow Pembroke students to wear CSHS cords at graduation ceremonies. Last month, the former president, Kathleen Morris, I'm sorry, spoke to you about all the important work performed by CSHS and the strict academic and service requirements for this organization. I'm not as elegant as Kathleen, so I'll keep my remarks brief and focus on two words: celebration and inspiration. I think the cords at graduation are a fitting celebration of the hard work and long hours put in by CSHS students during their time at PHS. Wearing the cord is a small but important symbol of recognition and appreciation for these efforts. It may seem like an insignificant gesture to some, but I promise you that students value wearing these cords and take great pride in receiving them. Sometimes I think it can be hard to find a way to tangibly appreciate the hard work and service to others performed by Pembroke students, but wearing a cord on graduation is an important gesture to recognize students' efforts in national honor societies. I also fear that taking away the privilege of wearing such cords will have a negative impact, even if it is not the intent of this committee. Banning the cords may signify to some that the administration does not value national honor societies such as CSHS. The other word I hope you consider is inspiration. Graduation is a day that gathers together current and future Pembroke students. Seeing the colored cords of different national honor societies draped around the necks of Pembroke graduates may spark a conversation about what these national honor societies are all about, and how undergraduates can also get involved. Younger siblings, cousins, neighbors will also wonder about the importance of these cords, and this can initiate conversations that will cause them to aspire to be involved in CSHS or another group when they reach high school. In my mind, celebration and inspiration are what graduation should be about, and therefore I ask you to please continue to allow the wearing of CSHS cords at graduation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Before you go, do anyone have any questions for Matt?
Very well said. Thank you so much for speaking. I know it's not easy, and you did a great job.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes, thank you for your time.
So, Matt.
And looks like Jeff April, you want to speak on about this topic.
Hello, members of the school committee. I am Jeff April. Next school year, I will be co-president with Matthew Wilshire in Computer Science Honor Society. Adding to what Kathleen has previously explained at the last school committee meeting and what Matt has just said here tonight, I would like to help advocate for the continued allowance of wearing CSHS cords at the senior graduation ceremonies. I feel CSHS is deserving of the cords at graduation because of our commitment to the program. With the help of our teacher, Mrs. Griggs, we have received letters of support from 3 different acclaimed people from the computer science community. They include Ms. Shannon O'Brien, past treasurer of Massachusetts, who has mentored the app development at Pembroke High School, Ms. Jen Manley, leader of the Computer Science Teachers Association, which oversees the work in computer science honor societies in Massachusetts, and Dr. Fred Martin, computer science dean at UMass Lowell and a member of the National Leadership of Computer Science Teachers Association. I have a folder that I will give to you that includes each of these letters of support. Thank you for your consideration.
Jeff, thank you. If you want to bring those up, absolutely. Appreciate it, thank you. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I know those are the only 2 that signed up. Is there anyone else in the audience before we move on discussion? Yes, ma'am? Julie? Yes. This is Julie Morris. Come on up.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time. I'm a longtime teacher, and I'm very appreciative of inclusivity in classrooms. And I believe that all learners should be celebrated, sometimes in varying ways. I do believe each diploma has the student's name on it and celebrates their individual accomplishments. One school of thought that was shared with me is that too many chords waters down the meaning. That is a philosophy that some may hold. Conversely, some don't view it as too many. I personally view it as, wow, look how many. One of my alumni here is Michael D'Angelo, and another is his little brother, Joey. I have to say I stood with great pride, and Joey tears in my eyes last week when he did the senior walk, and he came through, and he was adorned a variety of colors. And that foundation was built a long time ago. That achievement, that strive for success has been innate in him for a long time, as is with many of the students. I do believe it is a true celebration of their accomplishments. The hours that are spent beyond the classroom, beyond practices, beyond rehearsals, up, burning the midnight oil. To some of us, recognizing this achievement evokes pride and may even motivate other students to really strive for their own level of excellence and truly may raise the bar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate all the feedback we received from you guys today. I know it's always a challenge getting in front of a mic, so well done, all of you. With that, I'll bring it back to the committee. I know we've heard from others now. So we have the document before us. Thoughts on that as we move forward?
I mean, I think that we should, I would like to see us keep, let people apply the way they've been doing, so come before us, whenever there's a group that wants to have a court at graduation. But I think we just need to have a standard. I think we should come up with a standard. I don't know if we would put it in policy.
Put it back to the ed subgroup.
We can do that. Yeah, and then just, something, a Gpa requirement as well as a disciplinary requirement.
So are you envisioning an overall GPA requirement?
I would think so. I mean, it's an academic.
Recognizing that different groups may have a different GPA, but we'd have a threshold that they all needed to exceed. We wouldn't hold them all to just whatever the minimum is. They still would have the flexibility. Say, like I'm looking at honor societies, the 3.7. I'm looking at the 3.0 in computer science related classes. I'm looking, I don't know how many different variables there would be, but are you looking, I'm trying to understand what you're saying, to put into this that there would be a minimum threshold?
I think there should be a minimum
all
threshold because, some of the honor societies don't have an academic component. And so I think that, we should have the bare minimum set. I don't know, maybe.
Right, so you're envisioning like a threshold of 3.0, but for Computer Science National Honor Society, potentially, if we go that route, then I think their wording is, whatever.
They already have
Try
one,
M's
right?
easier, so it's A-, so
Yeah.
a 3.0 overall and an A- in music courses is what the
Right.
threshold for
Right,
Triumph
right.
would be. Okay.
I just think, if Pembroke High School is going to be, allowing it, that we should have a threshold. And, so if the thespian troupe wants to have a chord, you can't have a record, a disciplinary record where, unless it's been,
Or is there a threshold with that? I mean,
maybe there's
rec-
some sort of a review process or something that Mark, it's like a one-off basis. Maybe something happened freshman year, but by the time they hit senior year, they were okay. I don't know, but I
I
still.
think tied to that, I'd ask the subcommittee to consider what type of disciplinary actions there are, recognizing there are different levels. It's,
Right.
kind of like, felonies versus.
Right.
Yeah,
That's why
I
I'm
don't know
saying,
how
like,
it
it would
works
be
with
up to
the-
Mark's discretion.
I'm just using that as I'm not saying people have felonies, I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah.
but, that there are different levels of, so, you may have occurrences of detention that's
Yeah.
different than suspension.
Like if
you
they're
know,
late for school 5 times or something, which often happens.
So I look for some sort of, look for your guidance on that. 'cause
I think the first step, though, is that what I hear you saying, and I believe that David and Michael are of the same school of thought, is that all chords are granted through Pembroke High School.
Right.
/ the school committee.
Yes.
So, if there is an issue with discipline or whatnot, that's the discretion of the building administration, not an individual advisor.
Right.
Because in some cases, the advisors are not necessarily employees here in Pembroke Public Schools. The same if we're gonna get into awards for scholar athletes, right?
Yeah.
We wanna make sure that the person making the decision on the disciplinary piece is an administrator at the high school.
Right.
And, outlining back at the subcommittee what that looks like.
Right,
For the
right.
felons that
Yeah.
you want to get past.
I
Yeah.
stumble sometimes as I try to get the thoughts out.
Well, no, and I think that it's a representation of that process, right? Graduation is the school committee through the administration giving out these diplomas on behalf of us.
Mhm.
Having overall guidance of that process is important because it represents us. So,
Well, I think it's in line with recognizing, choices have consequences, whether intended or unintended. And part of our responsibility is to send students out prepared to deal in the world, and you can't expect to get necessarily recognitions if you're constantly making choices that maybe are not the best.
Right.
Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah.
So I like the idea of that component because I think it adds more consistency
so
to what we're doing.
So to summarize sort of what we've come up with, we're going to send back to Ed Sub to work on a academic standard that will sort of be the guideline as we set chords up, using that as the guideline, and then also work on a disciplinary structure and definition, if you will, so
Yep.
that can be established for groups moving forward to represent.
Right, with discretion, discretion from administration, of
And
course.
recognizing that we've had folks here speaking on behalf of one particular group that we've already put into the process and have experienced the graduation, for me, it would be difficult to roll that back.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to say they're in. And that would be my recommendation, that we put them in, we felt comfortable with that. I think I'm less comfortable with the idea of reversing that type of a decision. So would
Yeah.
that be incorporated into this wording too?
Well, I would think that we would allow anybody who wants to do a chord to come forward and request it, and then we,
Based on the standard.
based on the standards.
Right,
Okay.
so I think you're kicking it back to policy sub, there's 2 steps you need to do.
There is.
Sorry,
Yes.
yep, walk me
As
through.
far as what your current policy is on policy adoption. But if the policy subcommittee is inclined to propose wording that grandfathers certain things, that would come from them, and you have
Okay.
that discussion here.
Okay.
I think it would be too soon to say whether or not
Okay.
that would happen. But in order to kick it back, you need to suspend policy BGB, which is your policy on adoption, which means that this would automatically be adopted in the next 2 weeks because of the timeline from when it was presented. So you're not taking a motion here on A, you would be taking a motion to suspend policy BGB.
Yep, can you repeat that again, because I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding. We're suspending policy BGB.
So BGB is your policy on policy adoption about a first read, second read, and when something becomes automatically approved because of the timeline between those two or without any action on the committee. So because this came up more than 30 days ago,
Okay.
and you're kicking it back to the policy subcommittee, the odds of it getting solved in the next 8 days are slim. So you want to
Gotcha.
suspend BGB, or else
This
what
will
I presented
automatically
last
go
will
through.
automatically get approved.
So
Thank you for that guidance.
I will ask this group if there is a motion to suspend BGB.
So moved.
And seconded.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. The ayes, any opposed or abstain? No opposed or abstentions? The ayes have it.
We'll set up policies up. I don't know that we'll bring it back to you on June 17th. It might take a little bit longer.
Yeah, sounds good. And for all those, one, we want to thank you all for coming today. Two, we absolutely go for inspiration, and we value, and this is one time I think I can speak for my colleagues that we absolutely celebrate achievement, and that's I think why all of us get involved, because it's exciting to see growth, right? And so know that we support that. The challenge is when you're making decisions for a large group of people, you have to take a lot into effect. So we appreciate your input today, and hopefully your continued input as we go through this process. So thank you.
I think it's just important for you guys in the audience to kind of summarize what they're doing. The committee is in favor of keeping cords. They're pushing it back to a subcommittee to come up with the language that is the threshold for which a cord would be granted, whether it's a minimum GPA or a clean disciplinary record, however defined. But the committee has voted to support continuing students to allow students to wear cords at graduation.
Yes.
That isn't always clear.
Thank you for summarizing. I was getting to that. With that, we'll move on to vocational education discussion. Yes.
And for those that say we should give them a shot. It's getting ready to dry.
Mary Beth, was there any questions on that or any thoughts? No. Put that desktop right there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts?
Enjoy your summer if we don't
My
see you.
OCD goes
Bye.
crazy.
Can't have it. Can't.
Tempted to take away all our vacation days just for that.
Oh, where'd everybody go? So at your request, this agenda item was added to tonight's meeting to discuss vocational education here in Pembroke, what it has looked like in the past, what it currently looks like as of June 7th, 2022, what our options are for students, and what we could potentially do in the future to increase those options and opportunities for our students. I'll be the first one to tell you that I don't have an answer. I think the change in the Chapter 74 enrollment process was something that, you know, when we were talking in 2019 about our school of preference, is not something that we would have been able to foreshadow was coming our way, but it is here. And as you know, we have 4 students that have been accepted to Norfolk Aggie for next year, but there are no students going to South Shore Vo-Tech or Silver Lake from our incoming 9th grade class.
Aaron,
So-
real quick on the Chapter 74. Do we have advocates to help as those changes get made?
So we are not a Chapter 74 district because we
Okay.
don't have our own vocational program. So the change in the enrollment policy, which now states that districts must take all member students that meet the minimum admission criteria before they can take students from any district outside their member districts. We are not a member district of any vocational school. Silver Lake is designated by our policy as a school of preference, but that does not make us a member district there. So those schools those districts and towns that have a Chapter 74 program obviously have somebody a liaison that they work with at DESE. And when the change was rolled out, there is a piece to it that allows districts to make tweaks and changes to their enrollment policy. Because keeping in mind, like, let's say our situation with Silver Lake in particular, it is obviously very beneficial for us to send students to Silver Lake. It's something that we can't offer our students, but it also has a financial component for them. So they balance their budget based off of the tuition that we're sending them. So there is some flexibility at the vocational district level to tweak the enrollment piece of it. So you'll see as one of the suggestions I have in there later.
I'll
kind
let
of-
you,
Yeah.
I should have let you talk first.
No worries. Sorry, the screen's really small, so I'm gonna look at my paper. I'm getting old. So this is just our historical enrollment. As you can see, the number of students that we have going to vocational schools has increased in the past, I'd say, 8 or 9 years, typical with what is happening across the state and across the country. Norfolk Aggie has been a pretty stable number for us. We have just a handful of kids each year get accepted there, but even that is an increase for us. Back in 2010, we only had 4 students there in grades 9 through 12. Going into next year, we have 17 students there. Bristol Aggie is another agricultural school. We did have one student that attended there for 2 years. Their mother was a teacher there, so that worked for them. So the agricultural schools are exempt from the Chapter 74 piece of it. Those are, they're entirely own breed. There's just so few specific schools for those type of agricultural careers, so they are not part of the Chapter 74 quote-unquote program. In Silver Lake, we have had a pretty stable number of students attend Silver Lake over the past 12 years. Obviously, in the most recent years, our numbers have gone up because our numbers at South Shore Tech have gone down. South Shore Tech stopped accepting our students a few years back based on the fact that they were in the process of applying for a MSBA building loan, and they were really honing in on their enrollment in their member districts. So our percentage of students that access vocational education is there on the right-hand side of the page. We're hovering around 2.3% for next year, but we've been as high as almost 3% of our students in grades 9 through 12 of our total enrollment. I think looking at our incoming 9th grade acceptances is a little bit easier to kind of break it down. So you can see again, Norfolk Aggie is pretty stable for us. Bristol Aggie was an anomaly with a specific family. But our Silver Lake numbers have increased in the past few years other than this year. And you can see that South Shore Tech did stop taking our students after the 2019-2020 school year. So traditionally, we have anywhere from 20 to 23 students accessing vocational education and agricultural education. Next year, we just have 4 with those 4 slots at Norfolk Aggie. So there's 11 or so students, 11 to 14 to 15 students that would have typically been accepted to Silver Lake in a regular year. That obviously are there's no acceptances for us. I think it's also important to point out, short of the change in the Chapter 74 enrollment policy at the district level, Silver Lake itself saw an increase in interested 8th graders in their vocational program. So whether or not, they're bottom of the minimum criteria or high achieving students, I don't have that information, but we were gonna see fewer seats regardless of the change in their enrollment policy because they do have a higher percentage. I think it was 57% of their current 8th graders were interested in a vocational opportunity for next year.
Do we have any idea how many students wanted to go to a VOTEC program?
Yep, so 31 kids applied to, per our policy, you have to apply to Silver Lake in addition to any place else you're going to apply to. So we had 31 students apply to Silver Lake this year. Many of those students also applied to South Shore Tech. Again, they're not taking any of our students, but there were 31 students. That is the traditional number of students that we have apply, and you can see from what
So
our
could we
traditional
have-
acceptance is, 10 or 11
I was
students
gonna
would
say,
normally
we're
get
probably,
it.
okay.
And they're always ninth graders, because once they're in, they stay, or do you have to
No,
apply
so
every
you
year?
can apply to transfer. Per our current policy, you have to go to Silver Lake for your freshman year, for your exploratory year. You can apply to go to South Shore Tech as a 10th, 11th, or 12th grader if there's a specific vocation that you're interested in that Silver Lake doesn't offer. We also have students that move to Pembroke from member towns of South Shore Tech. So if you lived in Rockland and were enrolled at South Shore Tech and come to Pembroke as a 10th grader, you stay at South Shore Tech. There's a handful of times also over the course of the 4 years that students come back to us, whether it's from the Aggie or from the vocational school. So there's movement between over the course of 4 years for some students.
But the applications, so we're looking at the new applications for incoming ninth graders.
Right, so there were
And-
31 applicants.
And the changes that were made don't affect students that are already in
No,
the
once you're in,
pipeline.
you're in, yep.
Okay.
So, that's even smaller. We have looked a lot at vocational education in the time that I've been here. This is just a timeline pointing out some of the things that we've done, talked about, or looked to do. So back in 2012, we did sit down with South Shore Tech to talk about what it would take to become a member town. And you can look at the enrollment charts and see in 2012, they actually, sorry, on there, in 2012, they took so few of our students. We had just had one student enrolled there in 2012. At the time, the buy-in for South Shore Tech was a $500,000 capital buy-in. There's no break on tuition for a member student and a non-member town student. So at that time, that type of investment didn't make sense for Pembroke because we had so few students going there, there was no return on the investment. The payback on that was huge. After South Shore Tech shifted their enrollment and started taking more of our students in 2018, we sat down and met with them again to see what would it look like for us to be a member town at that point, because we've seen more and more of our students are interested in the vocations that are offered there. I think it's fair to say that South Shore Tech has kept pace with industry, and Silver Lake's vocations that are offered, though they are starting to shift, are more traditional, like automotive. Those are not really what the South Shore Tech ones look like. There's some more computer automated type offerings, horticulture, the lab tech type stuff. So we met with them again. At that time, there was no longer a capital requirement to buy in because they had already entered their feasibility stage for the MSBA project. So any new member towns joining South Shore Tech, many of you have probably heard that Marshfield joined just this past town meeting, are committing to a building project, so a debt exclusion override for the building project of the new building at South Shore Tech. Understanding what that looks like for our community, that didn't make sense for us at that time. So we did want to provide some sort of stability. If you've been clued into the process, for our budget process for the past several years, there's a lot of variability in our tuitions line. Tuition at South Shore Tech is twice as much as it was at Silver Lake. So looking to get some sort of stability there, we did enter into an agreement with Silver Lake in 2019 for them to be our school of preference, meaning that our students would go there first. If they didn't get accepted there and they got into South Shore Tech, they could absolutely go to South Shore Tech. If they got into Silver Lake and South Shore Tech, I met with every individual family to talk about what the interest of the student was. And if they were truly interested in something that wasn't offered at Silver Lake, we allowed them to go to South Shore Tech. But the main funnel was to Silver Lake for the purpose of having some budget certainty as we moved in to the coming fiscal years. And from our budget and what we've talked about this year and last year and the year before, you can see that now. You see that we are in a stable place. We're not coming to you in January and February and saying our tuition line is $100,000 short. We've really been able to offer the opportunity to just about the same number of students as we have with that change in when our school of preference policy came forward. Outside of vocational education, we've talked a lot about our students that don't fit into a typical high school program or a vocational program, and that's what sparked the conversation on the pathways that we've talked a lot about at Pembroke High School, looking for some sort of middle ground for kids that are not interested in cosmetology or culinary arts, but really want to do something with their hands over the course of their school day. Something job-related, something with some internship opportunities, something with some career training, something to set them up after high school, because not all of our students go right on to college. Some don't go at all, some take a year or two off, some have a family business that they're joining, right? So what can we do to help students really enter the job market with a step up on other students? We talked a lot about certificate programs. We looked at what Plymouth North, I think, has been doing for a while. Some of that wasn't feasible for us, but that's where the Pathway program really came together, where we started looking at what are some of the things that we already have in place that we could build upon to create a path for students that has a certain career-minded endpoint. So we've talked ad nauseum about next year's pathways that are business and digital arts. We've talked about the expansion of that program to include manufacturing and fabrication. We've gotten some additional funds at both town meeting in our budget, as well as we've written to Senator Moran for some funds to get the manufacturing and engineering piece off the ground, because that's really hands-on learning for students. But I do think, our goal is to expand those pathways at Pembroke High School, but we've been really clear that those pathways are not a substitute for pure vocational education. So what are we going to do for our kids that are truly interested in a vocational education? There's a couple of options. Whenever we talk about vocational education, I think the conception or the misconception is that there's a cohort of kids that are in one shop and we should just add that to Pembroke High School. And that's not the case. You can see from what I gave you on the next slide, where our students at Silver Lake, the 34 students we have now, where they are currently enrolled there. And there is not one huge mass of students that is in one shop, and you can't just create one shop and be a Chapter 74 program. So there's a ton of licensing associated with the Chapter 74 program. I did give you guys some of that information on the frameworks associated with what it takes to have a shop. But looking at some of these things, I do think we're moving in the direction to capture some of these kids. So metal fabrication, obviously in its purest form, is not what we're going to be offering in the engineering and manufacturing pathway at Pembroke High School, but it's a hybrid of that. We've talked a lot about early education in our preschool and how we can capitalize on having that work for students and get them some training and get them, a certificate and get them into that type of field. Some of the others we're never going to be able to do. So culinary arts in itself, automotive, the capital requirements to build something like that at Pembroke High School would just be astronomical considering the number of students that are currently interested in those shops. So where do we go next? There are things we can do on the small scale, and there's a couple of things that we can do on the large scale. I will say that in years past, prior to COVID, we had open communication with both Elliott Glass at Silver Lake and Tom Hickey at South Shore Tech about using their shops. So they obviously have undersubscribed shops, or did up until this coming year. And was there a way where we could rent space from them to get kids some hands-on experience? They're both open to that conversation at the time and happy to continue to have that conversation with them. But the shops that are open and free in the afternoon or in the morning are the shops that kids aren't interested in. So I'm not sure we're really fulfilling anyone's interest by doing that. So we can, again, look to expand our pathways at the high school. I think early childhood is something that we've been teetering on for the past couple of years. There are a couple of moves that are associated with that. The preschool program would need to move from north to Hobblemock so that kids could move across the parking lot for courses and whatnot. Not a huge issue, but again, something that we need to plan for next year to put in place for the following year. Looking at some of the metal fabrication pieces of the vocational frameworks and incorporating that as we start to build out the manufacturing and engineering pathway for the 23-24 school year. There's also some other opportunities with having that pathway coordinator position that you all approved to build out internship opportunities for students that aren't necessarily in our pathways, right? Getting them working with some of our local businesses and our local crafts and tradesmen that are interested in having student interns with, having somebody be responsible for that coordination gives us flexibility for students that aren't necessarily in our pathway business and digital art program for next year, but whatnot. We took a wonderful tour of the Hatch building the other day, Susie, Sue, and myself. We do have an engineer coming in starting in July to take a look at that building and let us know what it would need just to be inhabitable, and some of the ideas that were sparked at the time, or could this be the vocational program? Again, you can't just have one shop and be a Chapter 74 approved school, so we'd have to look at what the requirements are and what that would take to happen at the Hatch building, but that's, a 5 to 10 year plan. That is not in the near future. What I think makes the most sense is the last one, is to partner with Silver Lake. So we us, they, whatever pronoun you want to use. It's an interesting conversation to be having tonight without Mike here, because Mike remembers the personalities from the Silver Lake School Committee, and many of them are still on the Silver Lake School Committee. And I can say when I went there to present the School of Preference, there was a lot of pushback from some of the members that were part of the committee when Pembroke was still a member town about wanting to make sure that our students weren't taking the spots of their students. So there was a lot of conversation there. But I think the best thing for us to do is to explore becoming a member town of Silver Lake. So what that would mean is there's a guaranteed number of seats that you as a district are going to pay for every year, even if we don't have the number of kids that are interested. So whether it's 8, 10, 12, 15, needing to guarantee those seats year after year. They would have to make a change to their Chapter 7 to 4 enrollment policy, so they'd have to work with the state to do that, and they'd have to be willing to do that. Elliot and I had a conversation about it. He's feeling out his committee to see if he thinks they would be interested in that. But I think as they get into this fiscal year, they're going to see that they were really dependent on the $125,000 associated with our incoming kids that they're not going to be getting next year. So I do think that's where you all should probably spend the most energy in the short term. I'm happy to talk with Elliot. I think, Lance, their school committee chair, is quite friendly and reasonable, maybe making that connection just to feel it out, to see if that's an option, because that's the fastest way we're going to get to seats right there.
Karen, may I ask you a question? Because we talked about the potential to buy in years ago in the 500,000. Is that on top of the, say, the 100 and some thousand we talked about with the tuition?
We still have to pay tuition for students,
Okay.
right? So
Just
South
wanted to
Shore
make sure.
Votech back in
Well, that was for
2012.
South Shore Votech, right?
South Shore Votech
Not
back in
Silver Lake.
2012, when we wanted to buy in, was $500,000
Okay.
plus $21,000 a year for every kid that went there.
Okay.
And now it's a debt exclusion, now it's even more.
So now it's, to be a member town, you must pass a debt exclusion override for their building project and pay the $21,000 a year tuition for the students. So.
Yeah.
And pardon my ignorance, South Shore, Votech, and Silver Lake are similar in their offerings?
No.
No.
Well, it is getting better. So allied health, horticulture, those were never offered at Silver Lake until the past, I think 3 years ago they started those. They are starting to shift their shops at Silver Lake, but Silver Lake is the more traditional automotive, culinary arts, cosmetology.
So do we think there could be potential to see more because South Shore Votech has quote-unquote more up-and-coming skill sets, offerings?
I think that as enrollment settles at Silver Lake, they'll start to shift their shops and what kids are interested in. With such a huge number of 8th graders now in their own districts coming into vocation, I think they're going to see a shift. And even talking with Elliot in years past, automotive was one of those dying vocations where it was always the left shop if you were transferring in, or that's where you landed.
Yeah.
So I can see them potentially over the next couple of years phasing out some of those and bringing in some of the other ones that are offered at South Shore Votech. So welding is one that's offered at South Shore Votech that isn't offered. Electrical, those are some of the more trade focused.
Thoughts from my colleagues on this?
Well, I know Plymouth County, there was, and this was probably a few years ago, COVID kind of has distorted my, timeframes. But there was the farm that they were putting together, and there had been a lot of discussion with that. I mean, I see the horticulture piece. I know traditionally a lot of the farming is the Aggie piece, but with the horticulture, is there any partnership tied with them that Silver Lake might consider with that program that's still kind of in the building years? Is that an opportunity to get in early and partner? I don't know.
I
Kind of
wouldn't be
just
able to
throwing
speak
it out
for
there.
Silver Lake, but the horticulture program at Silver Lake focused mostly on landscape design.
Okay.
That's the focus.
On the
maybe.
architecture side.
Okay, okay.
I mean, I feel like we need to offer something. We can't. If the fact that we've got 0 students going to any kind of VOTEC and with so much interest is concerning. So, I think that makes sense. That I'd also like to continue to explore what we could do. As we've got the pathways that started, I feel like we could expand upon that. Obviously, long-term, hoping to have some sort of a vocational program here, but I realize it's 10 years out, but I'm just
Right,
thinking that.
and I would even caution you, and I would land more in having a certificate program than vocational. So the amount of pieces associated with a true Chapter 74 program, if you're going to end up offering early childhood, engineering, the break-even point is like seven vocations, shop teachers you need to have balanced with the number of academic teachers you have. I don't ever see us in a place where we're offering 7 traditional shops at Pembroke High School, 7 certificates maybe, but not the shop piece associated with it.
So my mind obviously goes in lots of places. I concur on, I think it's important to try to rebuild the relationship we have with Silver Lake and see what opportunities we can get there to start, because that's the low-hanging fruit. And then my mind from my other background goes to what partnerships, as you shared, can we have in the local community that a restaurant doesn't open up till noon? Can a 9 a.m. kitchen be open to us in a restaurant to run a class, right? I think about those things. Is there trade partners that we can find that can help teach these kids in our community? So tie that in. We don't need the campus necessarily here. Where can we find that campus but still teach those skills that we can give those kids the opportunity to still have that same educational experience, but utilize our community for that? So,
Right, and some pieces associated with that have to do with high school scheduling. Like for
Right.
students like that, you need to be able to freeze their courses so they're either taking morning classes or afternoon classes, so that the block of time that they're available to be out in the community is substantial.
it would take a lot of logistical
Right,
work.
but
yes.
absolutely not impossible to do at all.
Sure.
And is that something that the new Pathways Coordinator could look into, or was like,
Yeah, I mean, we've started looking into it, so I think, it really starts with Mary Beth, Mark, Jess, and myself. That person can pick it up, obviously, when
Yeah.
we've decided, there's obviously you need a huge shift in order to go to a block schedule or a static schedule.
Right, of course, yeah.
Just from the entire population of the high school, not just the 17 vocational students.
There's also been a shift in the state's designation of internships. Students can do internships now outside of the traditional school day. So for example, if a student finds a pathway, maybe it's related to the culinary arts, maybe it's related to early childhood, they can do that at a time that's not during the traditional school day, allowing them to go to work, and then to do that at another time, either vacation, summer, after school. There's been a lot of changes in the regulations around internships for students.
oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
All right, so,
With that, I know we had a member of our audience that would like to speak. Dan Smith, are you here? Like to come on up?
Thank you guys for having us. Thank you for contributing your time. I know it's a lot. Dan Smith, my wife Jen. I personally graduated from South Shore Votech. We have a just about 16-year-old at Silver Lake right now with 3 boys. Ben was one of those enrollments that didn't have a place to go. We're a little broken up about it. As you probably all know, you saw all the emails and such, but we also get it. Jen saw this coming quite a while ago. I feel very, very strongly about the vocational education, a real vocational education. I was a little disappointed when Danny in 2019, I think it was, had to go to Silver Lake. However, I was incorrect. Silver Lake is great. It's a perfect fit for him. He's in metal fab there. He's doing a great job, and they love it. It's excellent. However, I like the concept of Pembroke solidifying something with one of the towns. I do thought about this in every sort of way. I feel strongly that these Pembroke trying to produce or reproduce a vocational program or a sort of program with construction costs and equipment costs right now, I think the town would be absolutely foolish to just not lock something down with one of the schools that's already doing it and doing it well. Personally, I think we have a huge opportunity right before us. Coincidentally, that South Shore Votech is just been approved for this new school. There's been 0 design work right now. Like Pembroke, it's not going to help my kids, but Pembroke could get in on that on the ground level, and that school is incredible. And they are the new school. I can't even imagine what they're going to come up with a new school with technology, the team they have there. We're missing out to not fully jump on board with something like that. I mean, I don't want to belittle $500,000, but you can't reproduce a metal fab shop even partially.
Right, so just to be
in the
clear, it's
equipment.
not 500,000 anymore.
I know-
It's
I
a
know it's a-
townwide debt exclusion override, so the entire tax base would have to vote
Yeah.
Similar to when we got the roofs on the schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's every bit as important as a roof on the school. You know, it just, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that education. I currently own a small business. It's now in Marshfield. It wasn't Pembroke, but employ 25 people. And, you know, I came right out of high school, right at it. I think my kids are probably going to do the same thing. And it's just a different brain makeup. And you get in that group with your peers that think the same way. It's huge, and if I didn't live it, I probably wouldn't feel as strongly about it, but to have to it, oh, we're missing out. These kids are missing out. You know, I'm really broken up about my middle son. You know, he's in this limbo period, and it's like super frustrating as a parent, you know, and I know everybody's doing their part. This is no one's fault. Mr. Glass, unbelievable, great person. I've talked with, you know, Tom Hickey over there at South Shore. I've done my homework. They're great people, all pulling for us. But we got to jump on board with somebody and really lock it up, in my opinion. You know, so. Do you have anything to add? And these kids, not to interrupt, but these kids are still going to go off to college. They're going to, you know, it doesn't, it's not like it was, like, it's a really, really huge thing, you know. I appreciate you guys putting the time together for all this, and keep us posted, anything we can do to help. But I
I feel like
think
we're going to be sending some
social-
interns your way, Mr. Smith.
What's that?
I feel like we're going to send some interns your way.
Send them along.
Thank you, Dan.
And just
Thank
to
you,
that
Dan.
point that he was making, about 70% of our students that are graduate from South Shore Tech or Silver Lake do still go on to college. So my husband is also a vocational student, graduated from the Weymouth Vocational Program, went right into culinary arts. That's not the case anymore. Lots of kids go on to college before they go on to the workforce.
Well, and like you said, we all learn differently, and we all have different passions, and the educational experience needs to encompass all of that. So I think our job is to try to make sure that we are able to provide the best experience possible for our kids, and know that we're going to advocate for that. We're going to look at those options. We're going to talk with Silver Lake and talk with South Shore Votech and see what our best options are, and see where we can go from there.
I also think, as you referenced, there's still, you know, between 12 and 17 kids that no matter what we do, it's not going to benefit them, whether it's a short-term fix for the following year or a long-term fix for 5 years from now. So we understand and appreciate that and intend to kind of tap into those kids that are now finding themselves as freshmen at Pembroke High School that didn't ever really see themselves as freshmen at Pembroke High School, and talking about the expansion of the pathways and, you know, what type of things could we offer to help them. Some kids just need a carrot, right? They can get through math and English if they know later in the day there's X, Y, or Z. And we want to make sure that everybody is a happy student at Pembroke High School. And, you know, the idea of 15 kids or so that self-identified as not wanting to go there and are now being forced to go there is not lost on us. And I think, you know, Mark, Mary Beth, Jess, and I will talk about over the summer what that looks like and bringing those kids together and kind of seeing if we can create something for them too, because it is a loss. Granted, if we do get seats at Silver Lake or South Shore Tech, they can always transfer their sophomore year, but you know, just making sure that next year isn't a lost year for them.
Just
Would you just go up to the mic? So.
He's going to give you your own.
All right. just so
the people at home can hear. It doesn't.
Just so there's no
amplify in the
silence
room.
while you chalk. Yes. Yeah.
No, so I'm Jen Smith. Hello. Is it possible that the children that are going into the 9th grade, the in-district kids, back out last minute? Because I hear that happens a lot. Like they change their mind. You know what? I don't want to do that program, and they
You
go
mean
to
like
the
current Silver Lake students?
Correct.
Yeah. So there is definitely shifting that happens over the summer. Elliott still, Silver Lake still has a handful of kids that are on a wait list for them because their shops are full. So it would go to those students
Okay.
first before they would come to ours.
Okay.
But there's definitely shifting that happens.
Okay, so there is a possibility
So,
that
there was this weird rumor that there was one student that got accepted.
Oh.
It was actually one family that misunderstood the conversation that they had with Mr. Glass. They were not accepted, but I think he did share with them that there is potentially movement over the summer at times. And so that, all hope is not necessarily lost, but he wanted to give them a good idea of kind of where it was right now, so.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, forgive my ignorance on this, but what would the debt exclusion look, I'm just curious, like how much?
Right, so when you build a high school, it's anywhere from 16 to 22 million. When you build a vocational school, obviously there's far more that goes into that. So let's just say it's $30 million split between the member towns. There's, with Marshfield, I think 5 member towns at this point. So you'd be looking for a $6 or $7 million debt exclusion override. I think, what is it, for every, it's 21, 24 on your taxes for every, so to get the additional 1.3 million for the community center was $21.24 on your taxes. So you're looking at about 150 on the average house a year, which I don't think is too much to ask for kids to go. I absolutely believe in vocational education, and we want our kids to be where they're going to be successful. It is a huge uphill battle campaign-wise because you need the entire town to vote for the debt exclusion override, and the number of students isn't necessarily there. From our historical enrollment, it doesn't mean that if we weren't a member town at South Shore Tech that 70 8th graders might want to go there, right? But I think for us, that's something we would need to talk about how to approach that, because that's going to be the feedback we get. We're talking about 15 kids and $6 million.
Well, to that end,
which is a small argument, right? That's not even an
at our
argument.
middle school level, are we identifying, or is there some sort of way, I know we've done a really good job of introducing the kids to a lot of different concepts at the middle school level to expose them to different fields and different areas of study. Are we starting to help identify or encourage that sort of thought process so that as they're becoming 8th graders, they're a little bit more sure about what they might be interested in?
I have a 13-year-old, and they're not sure about anything.
Well, no,
they're not sure if they have deodorant on most days.
This is true. I know what he
So,
does. I
and
know what he
we've
does
talked about this a little bit even when we talk about our students selecting a shop at a school, whether it's South Shore Tech or Silver Lake. I'm not sure any 14-year-old necessarily, well, some of them do. The majority don't know, and we see a lot of movement from the time they enter as 9th graders to what vocation they actually graduate with in 12th grade. And you want kids to be able to shift their
And
thinking.
ninth grade isn't the only year that they have to choose. They
No,
have
so 9th
flexibility.
grade is an exploratory year, which means you have to be, depending on the school and the number of vocations they offer, you have to kind of rotate or orbit through 3, 4, 5 of them, and then you declare for the sophomore year.
Okay.
For students that transfer into a vocational school after 9th grade, all that's left
just
for you is
choose.
whatever's left,
Gotcha.
right? And so, that was some of the conversation we had when we started talking about our school of preference, because students could obviously transfer after their freshman year from Silver Lake to South Shore Tech, but the odds of them getting into welding or some of the real popular vocations was not possible. So. Right, if you're a hands-on learner, it doesn't matter if it's carpentry, automotive, culinary arts. I don't know that some of our students would go for cosmetology, but hands-on is hands-on. And I think Silver Lake recognizes that with horticulture and allied health. Those are not typical shops, from when I was in high school. So they're trying to grow with that too, but it's really it's the hands-on learning. Those kids' brains just work in a different way. And it's great to watch, and we see it at times with robotics, and we see it with some of the coding and computer science at the middle school, and it's great. You can almost watch it happening, and it's great. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing to see, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's one kid or 1,000 of our kids. It's just as important, and I think the committee has identified a couple of steps we can take in the short term, but this is a long-term conversation and goal for us.
Is there any action required of us on this?
With your permission, which you have to vote on to give me permission, I would like to approach Silver Lake formally and ask to have the conversation around a bank of seats.
So do I have a motion to give Aaron permission to approach Silver Lake about a MOI on partnering with them to get X amount of students a part of that?
So moved.
We have a motion,
Seconded.
do we have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? The ayes have it.
Because we'll know, if it's a hard no, it's a hard no, and we need to start.
Looking at other
shift,
options.
right, yeah.
Alrighty. Dan and Jen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next in my packet is the FY23 Admin Comp Guide for consideration of second read and approval. We've talked about this a couple of times. I think I answered some questions last time. There's been no changes to this grid. It is a 2% increase for administrators that fall within these job classifications, as well as the additional request that I've made this year for those in this grid to be able to purchase 5 vacation days back, recognizing that we are, everyone fingers, toes, everything crossed, coming off what is going to be our last year of the pandemic. Obviously the goal is for folks to take the time that is allotted to them. It's given to them for a reason. People need to refresh and reset, but the past couple of years haven't necessarily allowed people to take the time that was given to them. So recognizing that, cleaning the slate, and starting over for FY23.
Any questions for Aaron before we go on? Then I will accept a motion to approve the second read of the fiscal year 23 administrator compensation grid.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Next, so May 10th, we had asked you all for approval to send out a family survey to gauge interest in summer offerings for students, trying to build upon the momentum from our February and April math academies. I'm happy to report that we had 41 respondents. That's 41 total. Remember when we first surveyed folks about math, so about 30,000. So 41 families responded with varying level of interest. There was not a really great pattern of who was looking for the 2 weeks, the 1 week, what the week was. I think the critical, or the cohort that we had was 19 families picked one of the options. It doesn't make sense to move forward to offer something for grades 3 through 8 for 19 families. So it is my report to you that we will not be offering the summer school as we had talked about as a build upon of the Acceleration Academies. But what it does do is leave that funding available to really pour it into our tutor model as we get into the fall. So we've had great success with that model. This school year, we had always talked about keeping the tutors depending on the funding level available in that ESSER 2 grant. We talked about starting them a little later, ending them a little bit earlier. But now with that flexibility of not running the summer option, we have a very good pot of money to really spread them out over the 5 buildings for the bulk of the school year.
Is there any appetite for tutors through the summer to help with support to get students prepared for the fall?
That model is not cost effective in the sense where you're talking about those would be one on off, one off. To make that match like that, I think with what we've seen, it started obviously first in our elementary schools. They're groups of 5 and 6 that they're pulling together. That makes it a really, really great intervention for those kids, and it makes it efficient and cost effective.
And most likely that model couldn't happen in the summer. Yeah.
Not with 41.
Very true.
Mary Beth checked it every morning. She's like, nobody else.
No, and that's great because it allows us to focus ahead and really keep building.
And just to remind you, there'll still be a credit recovery summer school for 9th and
Yes, our regular summer offerings, and we're doing the early literacy, the Title I early literacy program that we had great success with last year.
Excellent.
For your update on quarantine guidance and at-home testing, I feel like I'm recording. I'm not going to show you slides because it's super easy. So we gave out our last round of at-home tests for students and staff this past week at all of the schools. That program does not exist moving forward. The state has discontinued the at-home testing kit program. For families that are still interested in testing over the summer, you can still get kits at Town Hall. There's an abundance of them there. The nurses do have some kits available if we need to do symptomatic testing during our summer program, but I don't anticipate that being a thing for us. But the quarantine guidance has changed. So you'll remember that previously, if you were an identified close contact that was asymptomatic and vaccinated, you did not need to quarantine. That guidance changed a week and a half ago to if you are an asymptomatic identified close contact, regardless of vaccination status, you do not need to quarantine. So as long as you're asymptomatic, you don't have to quarantine for any reason. So we haven't seen a ton of that in our schools because our vaccination rates at the secondary level are pretty high. But there are a couple of instances where a mom or a dad is positive and a younger student is unvaccinated, so now this allows them to not miss any school. So we haven't seen, we've had I think 3 or 4 in the past 10 days that fall into this category. We haven't seen the student contracted or it's pregnant.
And now that it's approved for the younger ages, we haven't done any statistics on that.
We stopped collecting vaccination status
Once we met the level.
once the mask mandate was removed. So
Sounds good.
I'm happy to log your vaccination if you want to share that with the school nurse, but there's no push to.
Sounds good.
The last thing in my report is everybody's favorite music trip to Disney. So that, to me, signifies that COVID is officially over.
Agreed.
We're in Disney World,
Agreed.
COVID is over. So in your packet, you have the request from Gwen. There's like 37 other pages that go with this. I'm happy to share it with you. But it's the trip you all remember, that you all loved.
Trip I went on. It was very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, have you all been on it? Did you go?
I didn't go, no, but
Oh,
my
I
kids
did.
went.
But I was with
It's your
your
turn
son.
now, it's your turn. Your turn.
Yep.
So
Yep,
we
I
are
got a fresh
excited to be offering this to students, obviously guesstimating that 100 kids are interested. Gwen would like to move forward and do the interest meeting that we do with all of our trips, out-of-state overnight trips, so. It's just conceptual approval at this point. It will come back to you when there's actual details, number of kids, chaperones, exact costs, some of the
Alright.
price emphasis.
Sounds good.
Great.
Do I have a motion to approve the conceptual submission here for the Pembroke High School music trip to Disney?
So moved.
We have a
And seconded.
motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
It is approved.
Yay.
So you all just have one more date on the calendar, that's June 21st, which is a great day, day before the last day of school, we all decided that that works for
is.
everybody. Typically, you have met once in July, and once in August, but again, we're happy to do whatever makes the most sense. We do have to meet at least once in July, it needs to be towards the middle of July so that we can close out the fiscal year, that needs to happen. It usually happens that second week or so, the July 16th-ish week.
Seeing as I left my phone out, I will lead those with calendars to grab the date for me.
All right,
So you're saying school, we already have June 21st on the docket, right?
Right.
So June 21st.
So my suggestion would be that you meet on July 19th, which is the third Tuesday of that month, which is
Okay.
your regular schedule, pretty much, for the FY '22 closeout, because we will be done by then.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of other things on your
You
future
mentioned
agenda
the
items.
subcommittee.
So, you all need to reorg your subcommittees, so if you want to, I'll send out what you currently are on and think about if you want to switch, and we can talk about it. You could do that at the June or the July meeting. We had talked, and it'll come up during my wonderful evaluation that I'm sure you guys are already writing, that one of the goals was to have those focus groups, so we need to decide on what those topics are and get the calendar out to folks so that they can start to plan. I think it's hard for people to get together in the summer, but I think if we can get that calendar out
Yeah.
sooner rather than later, that would be helpful. And for those of you inquiring what Mom's Demand Action is, so on June 21st, there was a request under the previous chair to be placed on the agenda by a group called Mom's Demand Action, which is a group for advocacy on gun laws and safe gun storage in Massachusetts. So not any new law, just reiterating what safe gun storage laws are in Massachusetts and normalizing that conversation for families. When you're sending your 5-year-old over for a play date, feeling comfortable saying, do you have handguns and are they properly stored? There's a whole presentation they'll give you. We had some of our mental health staff sit through the presentation. I think it's insightful, but I do think it's just reiterating what the Massachusetts gun laws are, so.
Is there an ask of us?
They're asking to partner with us and have the school sign I don't know if it's an MOA or an MOU, about safe gun storage and including that information on our website and potentially including that as part of our registration packet where people would self-identify that they have guns that are safely stored. There's a couple of, Plymouth is a safe storage district. There's a couple of other folks that have talked about it, but Plymouth is the only one that has gone all the way through with a resolution for it. So,
Their school district.
yes.
Alrighty, thank you. So with those dates in mind, do we have a motion to adjourn to move to executive session pursuant to Chapter 30A, Section 21A, 3, to discuss PTA, UNA grievances, and to discuss a personal service contract, as an opening meeting may have detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by the chair.
So moved.
Do we have a motion?
And seconded.
And a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.